Okay, now species today look very different from their ancestors. This is just an example of how things change over time. Now, Megatherium is an extinct ground sloth that was roughly the size of an elephant. Okay, the sloths that we see now, of course, are nothing like this. So there was some type of environmental pressure that caused being this large is not a benefit anymore. Okay, maybe in the Ice Age it was, but those organisms are not going to make it once the climate warms up again and you're not in an ice age. So the sloths that we see nowadays are very small compared to this. Okay, here's divergence. It's the accumulation of differences among two groups of the same species. So let's talk about those finches again. So we have this ancestor finch, okay? Now, like we talked about, we have these finches on many different islands, different food sources, different climates, moderately, okay? And over a long period of time, maybe the area where the ground finch lives has a lot of seeds, okay? So any of the finches with a large beak like this, they're going to survive and reproduce and pass that trait on. The finches that do not have that large beak in that area are not going to make it. Okay, but what if another island has a lot of cacti? Okay, so then this type of beak, the small, thin beak, is going to be more advantageous. They survive and reproduce. Those that do not have that beak type probably die out. Okay, over generations and generations now, this cactus finch and the large ground finch probably can't reproduce anymore because they're so different. That's descent with modification and divergence. Speciation is when a new species is formed. Divergence is the driving force behind it. And even some species have subspecies like dogs, okay? All dogs used to be the same species. But now look how varied they are. And a lot of that has to do with artificial selection and humans breeding them for the traits that we wanted. Okay, but originally they were all one species. That's changed over time. Okay, here are the key evidence for evolution. There are 4 that we're going to talk about. The first is called biochemical evidence, which is basically just looking at the amino acid sequences of organisms. Okay, now this is in one particular protein called the cytochrome C protein. It has between 100 and 104 amino acids. Now this chart shows you how many differences in that particular protein 2 species have for amino acids. Okay, so let's just look at, let's look at the turtle. Okay, so I'm looking down column A for the turtle. If I look where turtle and chicken overlap, I see 8. Between the turtle and the chicken, there are 8 differences in the amino acid sequences in their cytochrome C protein. Okay, out of that list, that's the smallest number for turtle. That means they are the most closely related for the turtle. The largest number for the turtle is 33, which is the moth. That tells us that there are 33 differences in that protein. So it is the least closely related for the turtle. That's how that chart works. Okay, this diagram is called a cladogram, and we can see the number of DNA base differences in the cytochrome C on this chart as well, so we can look and see similarities in DNA. The closer 2 organisms are on the chart, the more closely related they are. So we can see that yeast is far removed from the rest of the species, so they are the least related. Okay, we need to talk about homologous and analogous body structures. Okay, homologous is when the structures are similar, but they may have different functions. So, for instance, humans and cats. Okay, they all have the same types of bones. They all have a humerus, a radius, and an ulna. Okay, same with the whale and the bat. Okay, they have similar structure, meaning they have bone structure, but they have slightly different functions. Okay, the human arm is for carrying things, the cat leg is for walking, the whale flipper is for swimming, etc. So if they have a similar structure or makeup, but maybe a different function, then they're homologous structures. And this typically shows some type of common ancestry. Analogous body structures. They are different in the structure, but they may have a similar function. So for instance, we can look at a butterfly wing and a bat wing or a bird wing. Okay, the butterfly wing does not have bone structure, different in structure, but both are for flight. But because of their structural difference, probably not a common ancestor there. Okay, vestigial structures are structures that are present in an organism but serve no purpose, or at least no purpose anymore. So here's some examples: the human tailbone, wisdom teeth, and goosebumps. So wisdom teeth, for example, our diets over time have changed a lot. Nowadays we eat a lot of processed foods, but our ancestors far, far ago, they didn't have processed foods, okay? So they probably needed those teeth in the back to grind up their food, okay? And then goosebumps. Our ancestors probably had more hair on their bodies, okay? For insulation, you know, just being out in the elements. They didn't have climate-controlled houses like we do, okay? Now the appendix, we used to say that that is vestigial, but very recently we've found that it does serve some sort of purpose for housing beneficial bacteria that can help recolonize the gut with good bacteria to break down food. Of course, if you don't have one, you're fine because you have bacteria in the rest of your gut, but it does have that use. Okay, let's talk about the fossil record. Fossil record is all of the information about past life that can provide evidence about the history of life on Earth. Okay, we can look through these layers of the Earth and get a picture of what life was like. Now, the fossil record is very incomplete because not all organisms become fossilized after death, okay? So we have parts of skeletons, we have some information, but if we weren't there, we don't have all of the information. Over 99% of all species that have ever lived on Earth have become extinct, which is pretty crazy to think about because, I don't know, I like to think that there's a lot of animals and species out there. Okay, looking at the fossil record, pretty simple, knowing that the bottom layers are going to be older layers of the Earth, top layers are younger layers of the Earth. Okay, my last point here is embryonic development. Early embryo development of organisms show similarities, which could indicate some common ancestry, where an embryo is an early stage of development. Okay, here's my last slide. Now, take a look at the first row. We have all of these different organisms, and they look basically the same in that first stage of development. But as we go to the second stage, we can start to distinguish between species that are more related and species that are less related. So, I mean, comparing the fish and the salamander to like the chick and the hog, okay? Fish and salamander are more closely related based on their body structure as an embryo, okay? So that's all I have for you here. I hope this was helpful.